And we're going to begin with a little intention or prayer for our energy to connect here and share. And I will do that for us this time. There was somebody, did somebody volunteer to do it last time? I wasn't really clear in my head if that happened. So I prepared just in case. Okay, so here we go. Great Spirit, all that is, we call upon you to be with us in community on this learning journey that we share today. Guide us, inspire us, and protect us as we explore our greater selves and continue with our development as practitioners. We honor and dedicate our work together for the highest good of ourselves, each other, our clients, and the evolution of humanity. And with gratitude, we welcome our presenter, Patricia Walsh, who will be sharing her skills and her wisdom with us today. So be it.
So mote it be. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to give a few announcements. Number one, the gathering next month will be presented by Susan Lyons. Give us a wave, Susan. Susan has been doing group regressions every month for what, 5 or 6 years, 7 years, something like that. 7 years. And we had a bunch of debates on our board meeting about the efficacy of doing online regressions, but we have had such a beautiful experience with it. We wanted to share it with you and give you a tickle to consider doing that for your practice as well. So that'll be next month on the 26th. Is that correct, Susan? I was looking at my calendar. I don't think I put it on there. It's Thursday the 26th. It'll be 4 p.m. again. And we just board certified a new person this last week. She's not here, but I wanted just to acknowledge her. She's also going to be featured in one of our social media postings that you'll see on Instagram and Facebook. And her name is Deanna Torres. So we're really happy to have a new professional member. And we want to encourage any of you who are contemplating it to take the leap, become board certified. I will be happy to coach you through the process if you want to go through the applications. And we're looking for articles for the newsletter for the November edition. And if any of you are presenting workshops or have events that you would like to inform us about, please contact me and I'll make sure that it gets posted in the newsletter. We're trying to do networking for each other through the newsletter. We want you to participate if you have something to share. Okay. If you are on social media, please share us with your followers, get us out there more. I think our new members have come from our social media. We're really excited to keep it moving and going and learning more and more how to do it. And our social media person, Deborah Jacobs, who's also being our book manager for our book project, is going to be presenting 2 workshops for those of us who are social media num-nums like myself to help you get started. And we'll be posting 2 different workshops. One is, I think she said it was for Facebook, and the other is going to be how to create postings with a special software that she's good at. So those will be free to our members, and they'll be short, hands-on experiential workshops where you'll have your desktops have all your access to your Facebook and your Instagram pages, and then she'll show you how to do the posting and how to navigate it. So it'll be very helpful for those of us who want to take the leap into more, expanded notoriety and being out there in the world. Okay, I think those are all the announcements. Now I will introduce our presenter, Patricia Walsh, who some of you may have seen a few months ago when she was on our last panel. But I was so moved by the depth of your sharing, Patricia, and your wisdom that I actually enticed her to come back today. So here she is, gratefully. And she's been a professional member of IBERT since way back. And she also has a board accredited training programs that she sustains for many years. She's a lifelong seeker, a student of mysticism and transpersonal psychology. She writes, she teaches, she provides past life therapy, and she integrates the deep memory process that she learned through Roger Wilger, who was one of her mentors, with astrology, shamanic practices, and of course, past life therapy. She's the author of Understanding Karmic Complexes. I just checked, it's on Amazon. And her book is based on research of thousands of case histories of past lives through the lens of astrology. So for those of you who are astrologers, I'm sure that would be a deep dive for you to understand how the overlay of our soul purposes connect with our astrological charts and our past lives. So today, Patricia is bringing to us her background and therapeutic skills and her generous spirit to share about past life therapy and working with trauma. So welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So I'm really just going to kind of talk off the top of my head about why regression therapy works. So let's leave this as, if something sparks a question in you, feel free to raise your hand. Does everybody know how to do that on Zoom? Anybody who doesn't?
I don't see everybody at once on my screen. So maybe somebody who's got.
Well, you can change your view to the Brady, what I call the Brady Bunch view, which is, you know, instead of speaker view, you can change it up in the upper right corner to.
Yeah, but I want to video you as a speaker.
I see. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Okay.
You could maybe do that for yourself, and then you'll know.
Sure.
End up good.
Fantastic. I can see everyone. So if you raise your hand, I'll, you know, if I'm on a run, I'll notice that, and then I'll stop and see what's sparked your interest or you have a question.
Before you begin, could I ask everybody to put themselves on mute so we don't get.
I did it already. I muted them all as they came in. Okay, so why does regression therapy work? Well, I guess we have to first take the premise that somebody's going to believe in past lives, but I'm also going to say they don't have to. Years ago, really many years ago, Roger and I were asked to give a presentation at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. One of our graduates, it was a head psychiatric nurse there, and she wanted, you know, the doctors there to see this kind of process and how it touches the unconscious and so on. So Roger and I talked about how we wanted to present to these white coats. And I came up with a phrase and a framing that was a way to interface to, you know, that kind of mind that didn't necessarily involve past lives, but still captured the power of the subconscious and the ability for the subconscious to heal, which I know we all know. So I called it creative therapeutic displacement. And in that presentation, I presented it as, because I would do a lot of present life to past, well, not a lot, but let me back that up. You know, 20 plus years of practice, I work with a lot of trauma. It's the main reason people come to me. I don't do regression. That's people that are curious. I send them to other people. That's not my work. I always say to people, I'm the EMT. I got the paddles. If you're flatlining, come to me. If not, see somebody else, because that's not my job. So I deal with, you know, very heavy material, and I have for most of my practice. So many people that come have, and this is a longer discussion, but they have a repetition of what we would call a past life trauma in the current life. So they'll often come even current life traumatized. So lots of times I'll use a present to past life induction. And in the present and past life induction is where this idea of creative therapeutic displacement comes in. And what I mean by that is, I'll give an example. I've worked with veterans before. So, you know, I had one guy came to me, sat in my session room, came back from Iraq, young guy, 20 something, you know, freckle face, American, traumatized because he saw one of his buddies blown up by a roadside bomb, and classic PTSD symptoms. So he said to me, and he leaned forward in his chair, and he said to me almost with a whisper, it's like a part of me is still on the road watching that. And I leaned forward and I said, because it is. And, and he then felt a sigh of relief, because nobody at the VA would ever tell him that. Nobody anywhere else would ever tell him that. But if we understand the psyche from the view of many different systems, shamanism being one of them, we understand that, trauma's impact on the psyche has a fragmenting nature, and that parts of the psyche can become split off. And we know this from current life trauma. This is the dynamic of PTSD. A part of the psyche has split off, and it is still stuck in its little bubble, running its little narrative, or its trauma. And in the case of my example, this was a guy standing by the side of the road. We can say a part of his soul was split off watching this, right? Frozen there, just in horror. So, my work with him is like I work with a lot of clients, would be to go back into that. And the reason I would go back into the current life trauma is to liven it up. And in those moments, we all know that, and people, maybe you've had those moments, your car skids, right? And it goes into slow-mo. And then part of you feels like, you're watching it from, a lot happens in those moments. And I have diagrams of exactly what is happening to the total psyche in those flash moments like that. So, a part of him split off and is there. So we need to wake that part up, because what happens to those parts that split off is what psychology calls dissociation. And those parts that split off then form like what I would call a layer of defenses around them, which is what stops them from reintegrating with the psyche after the traumatic event. So it's that layer of defenses that also shores up or strengthens the dissociation and keeps that part in fragmentation. So we want to wake that part up and get all of the affect that was happening in that moment. And then, having prepped the client enough to say something like, look, we're going to use creative therapeutic displacement. We're going to allow your subconscious to displace a current life trauma onto an imaginary past life self in another time, in another place, right? And we're going to run that through to completion, which is going to alleviate you in the current life. Now, that would be my preparation with them before the work. And as long as they agree to that, it works. And so when we went to go talk to these doctors, this is what we talked about. People that are in repeating cycles of PTSD, right? We can have them displace that current life trauma, the abuse, the whatever it was that they experienced, onto an imaginary past life self, work that past life self through to completion, as we do in our work, and then come back to the current life self. So for those who don't believe in past lives, that's a way to describe or to treat the psyche in the way that the psyche is structured, and in the way that the trauma happened. Now, for those of us that do believe in past lives, that imaginary past life self is not imaginary, right? And when I say belief, I very, it's such a weird word. I don't believe in past lives. I know about past lives, right? And I don't want to sound arrogant about that, but I think any of you who've done the work for any period of time, you would say, we have a saying in my work. I have a bumper sticker and a t-shirt students have given to me where we say, you can't make this SHIT up, right? And it's true. You can't make it up, because when you go through that kind of experience and then you come back to your kind of present day self, you're like, wow, my mind is not creative enough to have, made all those connections and the profundity of the experience and so on and so forth. So one thing we need to take into consideration when we're dealing with these fragmented parts of the self is, as I said, the structure of the psyche itself. And we all know about homeopathic medicine, right? Homeopathic medicine is a bit of the hair of the dog that bit you. that stimulates a healing response, right? And this is the kind of quandary that we have in today's world, where modern medicine would say, oh, that's pseudoscience, or it's quack, or it's whatever. But people that use it know that it works. Sometimes not all the time, but sometimes it works. It definitely opens up something in the subtle fields, because that is the way the psyche is structured. So when we do regression therapy, like I said, if you go present life to past life, you know that you are using the power of the current life consciousness to exactly target the source of that repeating trauma, which is not from this lifetime. And that theory we teach in our work, and Roger always said it too. Trauma, like Freud said, is repetitive in nature. Freud noticed that early on in his work. When he was doing hypnotherapy, actually, is when Freud noticed, he called it repetition compulsion. And it is again a dynamic of PTSD, that somebody has a trauma, and a trauma fragments the psyche and freezes part of the impulse. And then that person gets into this loop that's like the record stuck, the record stuck, the record stuck. They will not only get triggered by like, right? Same in homeopathic, like cures like. They'll not only get triggered by like, but they will also draw to them similar traumatic experiences, right? Again, it's the psyche. And Freud theorized, when he saw repetition compulsion happening and documented it, that it was the psyche's attempt to heal itself. What he hadn't put together was the whole picture of what actually happens to the psyche, and the stages that you need to reintegrate those dissociated fragments. And that's exactly what we do in DMP. In fact, that's the focus of the work specifically. I always say to my students, if you don't hit trauma, you're doing it wrong. If you don't hit defenses, you're doing it wrong, right? We want to hit those places in the psyche. And so this homeopathic nature is the nature of the soul. It is the nature of the subtle bodies. So if we want to also understand why regression therapy works, we can go to the people that brought us past lives, like India, and not the Western notion of what past lives are, which is a bit of the watered down Vedantic philosophy. And in the Vedantic philosophy, they talk about the subtle bodies as koshas. It's like these Russian dolls, right? There's like layer, layer, layer. And in New Age parlance, we would call them the etheric physical body, which is the energetic counterpart to the physical body, the astral body, the emotional body, the mental body, the causal body, so on and so on. There's actually seven subtle bodies. So, which, as you can imagine, correlate with also the seven main chakras. So what happens now, let's get out of thinking that we don't believe in past lives to we do believe in past lives. We've experienced it, we know it. Knowing about the subtle bodies is also a kind of critical thing as to why trauma repeats itself life after life. Because once something is imprinted in the psyche, and as the Vedantic philosophy talks about, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but we can look at the three layers of being as spirit, soul, and ego, right? And they each have associated subtle bodies with them. Everything that happens in that lifetime is imprinted on these various subtle bodies. And when you die and you go into the bardo, what happens, at least in Vedantic philosophy, is that these koshas separate, right? And the spirit is released. And spirit, as we know, always goes to spirit plane. But it doesn't heal the residues the samskaras that are left in the subtle bodies, because when it reincarnates, it picks up where it left off. It's like dropping your clothing, right, on the floor, not putting it in the washing machine and putting it on the next morning. That's exactly what happens, right? It's kind of an analogy. So you put on, the underwear and then the shirt and then the coat and then the whatever. That is how they envision these koshas. And these koshas basically hold all of the imprints. And many of those are traumatic imprints. Like we know if it's a traumatic death, it can be the moment of death. If it's a grief or a loss that happened in that past life, and it was unexpressed or it was repressed, as we know, repression. You cannot repress material. The longer you repress it, the more distorted it becomes, right? You can pretend to hold it down, but it will still come out in some distorted way. And so that's because the subtle bodies are actually holding those imprints. So when we reincarnate, we're basically picking up where we left off. And those you've seen this, maybe you haven't seen it, but there's certain methods beyond regression that will stimulate the subtle bodies. Breath work is one of them. If any of you've ever done breath work, like Groff's holotropic breath, or even if you've done Kundalini yoga, right, which is where you're circulating the vital energy through breath, right, with intention. When you do that, you stimulate the subtle bodies. And many times in holotropic breath work, in Kundalini yoga, even in maybe certain Vipassana exercises, you will wake up these imprints. You'll get body pains. You'll get sudden emotions that come out of nowhere. You'll get terror. You'll get anxiety. You'll get flashes. Because these things are in these subtle bodies. So when something is, and in our work, what we do specifically is address each subtle body separately, part of the whole, but with the understanding that, and here's where, don't get me on my pedestal. I'll get myself on my pedestal. The modern, what I call idolatry of materialism, Cartesian thinking, reductionism, right? Where mental is superior to everything else. I'm sorry, my view, not true. It's not just my view, but not true. If you get it, if that was true, then psychotherapy would work, right? if you can get it in your head and you're over it, you wouldn't need 10 years of psychotherapy or 5 years of psychotherapy. The reality is the head is only one subtle body. If the imprint is held in the subtle body, you can wake it up through the mental stimuli, which is maybe, a like thought or a like circumstance awakens certain thoughts, like mother's going to put her child on the bus and she breaks down into, I'll never see them again, right? Which we know is not coming from this lifetime, but that mental thought will stimulate the other subtle bodies, the emotional and the physical, right? So, but you can't heal it just there. You have to also, so there's 3 levels of catharsis, just like the New Age talks about body, mind, spirit, and interestingly forgets emotions. Again, it's a Western bias, I think, in therapeutic work, because it's anti-cathartic. So to me, these levels of catharsis that need to happen, the mental level needs to have its aha. The emotional level needs to have its expression. Whatever's been repressed. And we know, again, put yourself in a situation of danger in your life, right? Whatever it was, you thought something bad was going to happen. You heard a knock at your door at 2:00 in the morning. A lot of thoughts and emotions can happen in that little split second, yet they go unexpressed because you can go into fight or flight mode, right? Like, I need to survive. I don't have time to, cry or have terror or whatever it is. All those unexpressed emotions condense and freeze. So when you open up a moment of trauma, past, being current life or past life, you need to give space for that emotion to be expressed, for all of those things that were there to be expressed. It's like a root canal. You're like cleaning out the wound. And then the physical, the etheric body, is very non-mental, right? The etheric body is pretty basic and literal. It's kind of, and I always say in my trainings, it's like knife in, knife out, rope on, rope off, right? If you died hanging, you need to get the rope off. You can't visualize it or have the butterflies dissolve it and actually resolve the residual neck pain, right? Because the body still doesn't know it's over. The body needs to know, oh, that rope is off. And body is very physical. Body is very literal, right? So when we do that level of body work in DMP, in deep memory process, it's specifically with this in mind that also during fragmentation, if you think about it, when I said, oh, somebody flies off, they dissociate, in fragmentation, that part of the psyche was not present to experience the trauma. The body was. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody even talk about a current life trauma where they kind of left, went somewhere else, watched it from the ceiling? That part, that part was not present during the trauma. The body was, because the body is really the only part of us that's stuck in time and space, right? Our minds can go anywhere. Our emotions are very fluid and change every moment. And, but the body is the one that's stuck in time and space. And so the body is the experiencer. So in our work, and I'm actually giving you a lot more advanced information than just why regression therapy works, but more the dynamics of how trauma imprints and how we release it in regression therapy. But the point of all of that is that regression therapy addresses the psyche in the way that the psyche is structured, and it's not in the conscious mind, right? All of these things, all of these imprints that I'm talking about in the subtle bodies are in the subconscious. And furthermore, we can look at, even if we want to, not believe in past lives, we can go to Jung and move away from Freud and go to Jung, where Jung talked about the subconscious has an individuated unconscious and a collective unconscious. Within the collective unconscious is the realm of archetypes. So it is possible when we do regression therapy that we are tapping into the archetypal fields. Why it would induce singular healing for an individual would be a question that, it would be a question if you didn't believe in past lives. Believing in past lives is knowing that you're going into the subconscious through the individuated unconscious into the collective unconscious, through the collective unconscious into the archetypal field, and the particular archetypes that relate to your soul's experience are the ones that you are working with. It's just like we can go to a movie together and maybe not all be touched by the same thing that happens in a movie. I mean, I remember a client of mine telling me who she had a past life of slavery, went to see, I forget which movie it was one popular movie at the time, went to go see it with her mother, and she was triggered by the sight of this plantation, almost to the point where she was panicking and having anxiety, just the scene of the plantation. where when she talked with her mother later, her mother had no impact with that, right? But was triggered by other parts of the movie. So this is, this is life itself. The archetype of slavery exists, but for this woman, it was a personal past life experience. And for most of us, the soul is largely unconscious. The total realm of the soul is highly unconscious. So if we're going to um, facilitate healing on a soul level, it is specifically to get to that kind of material that can stimulate something that's deeply below the threshold of our consciousness and our ability to access it in just our conscious mind. In our work, we also understand that the most unconscious part is the body. I mean, you're here, your heart's beating, you're breathing. Are you thinking about that? Right? Our body operates subconsciously with amazing ability, right? And it's true for all the imprints it holds and everything else. So, I'm sorry, somebody was unmuted, so I'm just muting someone. Um, so that holds true. Now, well, let me just stop for a moment and see if anybody has any thoughts or questions. I didn't see any hands fly up, but does that make sense? Yes. So, as I said, the mental body needs its aha, the physical body needs its undoing the imprint where it was frozen or stuck, as does the emotional body. When you put all three of those together, you are reassociating the fragmented soul. So the head is not elsewhere while the emotions are feeling one thing and the body is elsewhere. That to me is the essence of soul retrieval. Okay, more about why regression therapy works. I'm trying to think of some cases that might come to me about that really illustrate some points I want to make. Um, I don't, that's a little hard to say when we use the word imagination. It's a pejorative in our current day, where to me, imagination is not. Imagination is a function, a higher function of the psyche. And I mean, Jung even defines that by talking about the difference between fantasy and imagination. So when we tap into, and as we know, all regressions are not always based on image. Um, but when we tap into image, emotion, and body, again, the connection of those three main subtle bodies, that is the royal road to the subconscious. And using this power of imagination, and again, I'm not using it in the terms of fantasy. I'm using it as the, definition of imagination, which is the psyche or consciousness's ability to image, to create. I mean, it is creative force itself. Nothing exists without imagination. It started there, right? I don't want to get all Disney on you, but you know what I mean, right? um, and so when we harness that, I mean, that is what we're doing as regression therapists. We are harnessing this higher function of the psyche with the ability to bring forth image, and image, I'll use the word image loosely. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever done a regression, experienced a regression yourself where you had no images? Yes. I've had my body tell whole stories with no images, knowing what was happening, right? With that clair sentient or claircognizant knowing, but no pictures. So that when I talk about image, I talk about that as well, because this is, and this is where, again, in our present society, oh, my dog is having a little fit. I have to let him out. Hold on a second. Sorry. So when we talk about image, or when I'm using the term image, it isn't just that inner imagery. Image is also calling forth that which is hidden in the subconscious, in those subtle bodies that I was talking about. So we can also call that affect, right? That which is called forth by like cures like in the homeopathic sense. I mean, again, this is why people, again, experience PTSD, because there's something like a firecracker goes off and it reminds somebody of a battlefield, or a man in a black jacket reminds them of some repressed childhood um, trauma. My dog is really being a pain. He wanted in and now he wants out, and now he wants in and now he wants out. Just leave it open. Thank you. Um, so when we deal with image, we are, like I said, if we can get the all of the affect connected and together, this will, like I call it, it's like a Google search, right? You can go on Google and say, is there a restaurant near me? And you'll get a ton of results, which to me is what, in regression, when I use that analogy, I use that as kind of what I would call just kind of tripping around the astral plane. You can go into, and this is what happens in a lot of trance state work that isn't targeted. Unless you're targeting your affect, right? Unless you're targeting something, you can get a whole bunch. This is why people say, oh, they did 10 lives in one session. You're tripping around the astral plane. It's okay. It's kind of like past life tourism. It works for some people, it's okay. But when you really want to target the source of an injury or a trauma or a complex that somebody has, like, why do people always leave me? Or why do I never have enough money? Or that, when somebody comes to you with that kind of problem, you want to be able to target the source of that, right? Targeting the source of that involves, again, a really refined Google search for the psyche, because when you're plumbing into the subconscious, like I said, you do go into the collective subconscious, the collective unconscious. You do go into the archetypal. This is why some people get a bunch of Cleopatras in regression, right? You do go there, but it's not specific to that soul, right? So we want to heal that one imprint that this client is talking to us about. So the targeted Google search is not, are there restaurants near me? We could say, are there Italian restaurants near me? We can refine the Google search further and say, are there Italian restaurants near me that are open on Thursday? Are there Italian restaurants near me that are open on Thursday at 7 p.m.? That's a targeted Google search. When you use that kind of container to target specifically into the subconscious, you will get to the source life. You will get the exact association of when that imprint formed for that person. Or I want to qualify that statement, because complexes are also multifaceted. And because of the nature of repetition compulsion that applies to the soul in a single life, it applies to the soul over its many lives as well. which means, and I always call it like folders. Our psyche is associative memory. There's one function of memory that's associative. And the soul kind of stores memories that way in folders. So if you open up the abandonment folder, you may find 7 lifetimes in there. Again, because once a trauma happens, the record gets stuck and the soul continues to repeat the trauma until it's worked through, right? And that can take many lifetimes doing it unconsciously. Doing it in a targeted way, when we do regression, we are going, like I said, either to the source life or directly into the core of the complex. There may be several lives that are constellated around that particular issue, which is the dynamic of complex itself. Complexes are complex, is what I always say. But when you're in the complex with the target, you then, through a series of sessions, can work through the different facets of that diamond or the different aspects of that complex and kind of clean it out again, like a root canal, right? You want to get all of them. Does that make sense? Any questions? Thoughts? Experiences?
This is Holly. I have a question.
Yeah.
When you clear the complex of, say, abandonment, I wonder if going into lifetimes where the opposite of abandonment, where you were the abandoner, would be required to balance that karmic knot.
Okay, so Jung talked about that, right? Jung also, without even treading into the territory of past lives, Jung talked about the polarities of the psyche. And we know that this is a part of the way the psyche is structured also, which is why there's projection and your shadow stuff is all out there, right? We know that, right? We do it every day. And it's not always that you have to go there, it's that the psyche will go there. So what I've seen is let's stay with the abandonment complex. It is exactly as Holly said. You'll find repetition compulsion as well as you were the abandoner, right? And it's not always, the shadow is not black and white like that. It's more complex. So it could be, abandonment because of helplessness, right? You don't instantly go, at least in my observation specifically, with doing shadow work with people specifically, and my own. It's not always victim, perpetrator. Sometimes, just like we are in life, we accidentally hurt people. We are we're constrained so that we can't fulfill the wishes of our soul or our conscience. People get caught up in look at the Holocaust. People get caught up in collective movements, right? Where they might do harm to somebody. It's not a punishing, karma's not a punishing aspect of, victim, perpetrator. But you will find, and I use it more like this, to me, it's like the soul experiments with a theme, right? And if the theme is abandonment, then you will experience, or will most likely have experienced, many different facets of that, right? And in some way, you might be the one who's caring for the abandoned children, then you're the abandoned child, then you're the mother who died in childbirth, then you're right? That's the way it goes. And you will find that within all of the elements of a complex. Susan had her hand up. Susan Fisher.
There we go. I just wondered, I worked with a woman who was the victim of a serial killer, but she survived. And she wanted to know what that was about. We did many sessions, and I thought I was targeting back to the source. And it must have gone like 10 or 12 sessions before we got to the source. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, did she need that, or was she afraid to go to the source? What kept it
Well,
going so long
what
before we...
without disclosing anything about your client, what was her result after 10 sessions? What did you discern with her was the source of that?
She well, she kept dealing with this same soul, and he had killed her in many lives, and the source was she killed him in the original. They were
Yeah.
lovers, and she was royalty, and that was bad, and so she killed him.
Okay. So that is a kind of eye for an eye. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. It does, right? It's counter to what I was just saying, that it's not always victim, perpetrator. But it does sometimes happen that way, where we did something like that and then we set up a karmic dynamic with somebody over many lifetimes, right? Um, I would say that that's, to me, at least in my experience, less the cause uh, than the repetition of the psyche, right? Like somebody who's abused does not always mean they were the abuser. Um, so to your point, now I would say to get to shadow, what you're talking about is shadow. It takes layers off the onion.
Oh,
Okay, so I often see, and in fact, in our training, we offer two further modules beyond the 4 modules that it takes to do deep memory process. And one is working with ancestral and earthbound spirits, and the other one is the shadow. And I don't offer shadow workshops to people who've not done all 4 workshops already. The reason being is that we do need to peel away our victim layers, right? It's like you need to get rid of those triggers to be able to face the inner demons. And those inner demons are not, again, they're not always the, I was the Nazi or I was the. Now, on the other hand, I've had clients lay down on the mat and go right into those lives. And you know what their shadow was? Vulnerability. And
oh,
it took them 10 sessions to get to that, right? It was easier for them to identify with the perpetrator who had power because that was their defense. They couldn't get anywhere near the child that was abused and abandoned in another life, right? That took 10 sessions. That was their shadow, right? So, it can be like that. So, yeah, I would say that, so, you had to kind of peel away to get to that. And
okay.
that's fine. Yeah.
I just was wondering about my, as a therapist, did I handle that correctly, or could I have helped her get there sooner? But maybe she did need to take that time to get there.
Could be. I mean, I have some methods that I might have, after 3 or 4 of those, I might have just bypassed the the other 7, I have certain methods I might have used to bypass that, to get to the core.
Mm.
Or I wouldn't even say the core, because I would say that what you touched on was a core of the complex, right? That
Yeah.
repetition is it's equally as part of a complex as what you perceive or she perceived as what set it into motion, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Meredith? We're not hearing you, even though I see that your audio is not off. I don't know. It's yeah, we don't hear you. Or although somebody's sound is on. I'm looking. Not able to come up with it, Meredith? No.
She got off to reboot. mood or something here.
Yeah. So let me ask you then, what is it that you think makes regression therapy work? It's a quiz. Did you study for this quiz? Do you have clients ask you those questions? Why does this work? Is it real? I guess that's a big question for people sometimes too. Did I just make it up? That's a common thing I find with clients.
If
I
a client asks if I made it up, I said, did you make up those tears?
Yeah, exactly.
You imagine
Exactly.
those feelings?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do often say, if there's affect involved, it goes beyond the conscious mind, right? Although I suppose we can work ourselves up into tears or something. Um, yes, Joanne?
To answer your question, this is an oversimplification, but I basically say to people that their higher self brought them in the room because it had the intention to either further their wisdom about something or to heal whatever it is they're trying to heal. So it's a generalization, but it's to get people to understand there's a depth to what's going on that's well beyond meeting the eye.
Right, right. And, so I was talking about some of the deeper work when we're addressing what I would call complex trauma. Regression therapy as a whole, though, can be that kind of process that does, as Joanne said, answer those questions, give that higher view. That's, to me, mental level, mental, emotional, maybe. Depending, because oftentimes there is an emotional catharsis that happens with a mental aha, right? And there is a release of bound up psychic energy that happens with those kinds of regressions, like these huge realizations, right, that can come, especially after the regression. And at least in our work, we would do everything and then go to the, intermediary bardo and then go to the higher bardo, where we get these big, kind of eagle eye view of why that life and so on and so forth. And from that perspective, that is a kind of soul spirit perspective that, blows the mind. They're like, oh my God, that's why that happened, right? And that's hugely cathartic. I mean, when I say that's a mental catharsis, that's hugely cathartic and can be hugely healing. But I would say that those kinds of lives, if you're dealing just on that level, that's not going to address the kind of complex trauma that I'm talking about. And that's fine, because not everybody wants to do that kind of work. I'm just sharing from my experience because it is kind of my specialty to deal with that kind of work and these dissociated fragments of the soul, and to do that kind of soul retrieval work. But yeah, I mean, I've done hundreds of my own regressions, having been regressed, and they're all different, right? Some of them are those deeply below the threshold of consciousness, and some of them are very colorful and vivid and mental level, and they're all equally effective at healing what it was that was being brought up. And lots of times the repetition compulsion is happening only on the mental level. Like think about this lifetime. We can talk about, like, let's say rejection. Let's talk about childhood. How many of you, didn't hang out with the cool kids, or, the popular kids or whatever, or you felt like an outcast, or something happened in school that was embarrassing or whatever, and you formed some mental construct around that, like, I'm not lovable, or whatever it was that was, thrown at you by some bully or something, or, being, I don't belong. That's a mental complex that forms in a moment of trauma that then will repeat itself, like we know, right? This is what is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We have those kinds of regressions that happen on the mental emotional level will undo those kinds of complexes, and those complexes form in past lives all the time. So it will undo those kinds of complexes, where somebody will go back into some horrible life of being outcast, etc., and then have the ability to belong again, that then will relieve the soul of that unfinished business, that will then allow them to resolve the complex, or it kind of dissolves the complex in the current life, because there isn't a reason if you can unhinge it, there isn't a reason for the soul to continue to repeat it, right? If you can jump over the skip, or you can get through the skip, right, and get on to the next song, right? That's what we're doing in regression therapy, right? We want to go back to where that record gets stuck, right? Get through that part, unstick it, and get on to the next song. And that is exactly what I've observed happens in the psyche. It's like a bound up libidinal energy, right? And when I say libidinal, it's not erotic, it's life force, right? Eros is life force. And it's this bound up libidinal energy that's unable to be expressed because it's met some kind of trauma, right? I mean, what was it that I'm trying to think of the phrase, a Jung quote, where it talked about a complex is formed where we experience a defeat in life. And a defeat can be anything from a physical trauma to I didn't get picked to, whatever, join some sport team. And that triggered something deep in me when I was in, second grade. Therefore, I'm unlovable and I don't belong and blah, 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 right? You know what I mean? And then all of that libidinal life force that would be life force that would welcome belonging is repressed. It's not expressed. It's held under a defense of self-protection because the psyche thinks it's protecting itself now from rejection, right? So it won't release that life force. So when we go into regression and again, I'll use a present life to past life example, for example, that what I was talking about, rejection, didn't get picked for the team, blah, blah, goes into all the sadness and the thoughts, and then goes back to some past life where they were kicked out of the village, right? Maybe stoned and persecuted and kicked out and outcast and died out in the woods by themselves, right? With all of this horrible thoughts of grief and recrimination and all of that, that you could imagine might happen in that kind of scenario. And we release that then relieves the current life imprint, which we know was triggered by a like event, homeopathic. It was triggered by a like event. But then the trigger's gone. I mean, clients say this to me all the time. If we really get to the core of a complex, or or to the heart of a complex, and we alleviate it in regression therapy, all of the time, clients are saying to me, I used to be so triggered by that, but I'm not anymore. So then once that fear of rejection, the psyche protecting itself from being outcast and stoned by the villagers and left in the woods to die alone, once all of that is alleviated from the psyche and resolved, that libidinal energy that's in there, the desire, right? The life force that wants to belong, that wants to be loved, that wants to connect is released. It's automatically released. It's not even something you have to do. It's something that simply happens once you can finish the unfinished business, right? And really do it thoroughly. that libidinal energy will shine through. And then all of a sudden the person is going, I don't know, all of a sudden I have all these friends that I never had before. And I'm having this big social life I never had before, and blah, blah, blah. And again, it's like they're magnetically drawing it to them because that libidinal life force is now not wounded and is reaching out to life, right? Saying yes to areas it was unable to say to before, right? Where it was saying no. Meredith, did you get your sound back yet, or did you lose your question?
Oh,
No. Sorry. So, any more questions? Any thoughts?
I have another one. I've been studying a lot of new physics lately, and a whole holographic model is something I've been incorporating into understanding past life work, which I think is another way of basically saying what you're saying, which is that everything's connected. Once you tweak one part of the hologram, the other parts are going to resonate, like you were talking about homeopathy, that it's all happening simultaneously. So getting to the source of it's going to affect the whole hologram. Every piece of it's going to heal and change in that process of getting to the source.
Absolutely. I mean that, that we can get all into what you're talking about, quantum mechanics and so on. Does time really exist and blah, blah, blah. Well, from the spirit's perspective, no. Right? It doesn't. It's kind of an illusion. So, but it's a very real one that we're in. So yeah, again, it's really like I'm losing my words, but I'm thinking it's like, healing to the 1,000th power to me, when you can harness the actual potentiality of the total psyche, soul, spirit, right? I'm using those words. I use spirit separately than soul. Soul is psyche to me. Spirit is another plane of matter, but still interconnected. But when you can harness all of that to healing something, it's like quantum healing, right? And not only, and I'm sure many of you have noticed this, not only resonates in the person's life, where all of a sudden they have these abilities and capabilities that they didn't have before, that are just naturally released into the psyche, but the complications or things, or even things, people that they're related to, suddenly start to change too, right? You notice that? And sometimes that happens in regression, but it happens most profoundly, especially if you're doing regression with somebody that you have, like Susan mentioned before, her client having many lives with this other person. I think it was Susan that mentioned that, sorry. When you are exploring a karma with an individual who's in your life that you've been in a repeating pattern, it will alleviate that person locked into that karmic dynamic as well. But I find it most profound what Holly's talking about, that kind of holographic field, when you do ancestral work and you work with ancestral spirits that alleviate complexes from family lines, when you can get to the source ancestor that's causing a particular repeated pattern within a family. The whole family just changes. I mean, sometimes, the word I always use is subtle yet pervasive. And I don't know if you've seen this, because yes, we do have these really dramatic turnarounds in regression therapy. Where somebody fears and phobias and they're suddenly gone, right? Those kinds of things we've all seen, even physical healings, we've all seen that. But a lot of times when we're talking about complexes, and especially emotional mental complexes, what I see is that, and my clients use this word, it's like subtle yet pervasive. Like every area of their life is affected, in a new way. Again, it's that libidinal energy that's been bound in the complex, buried in the subconscious under walls of defenses, right? Susan?
Yes. And you're talking about the mental, emotional, and physical. I'm curious how you know that you've had the catharsis on the physical and that it's stuck, like that the person
Well,
really
it depends. Yeah, it depends. First thing, it depends on what you're working on. So there's a difference between working on an abandoned child life that is all emotional trauma, let's say, that there isn't an overt physical trauma. It's grief and, whatever, and all the thoughts that are so that's the level you're working on. But when you're working with somebody who collapsed in a mine and laid there, took them hours to die in the darkness, there is mental, emotional, and physical trauma. And all three of those need to be released.
Mhm.
So it's the nature of the trauma that would dictate, what you need to release in the afterlife.
Mhm. So if it is something physical that they went through as well as the mental and emotional, what once you start to do one and they're all kind of connected, will it automatically unravel itself?
Again, there's a lot, it's a whole module. The last two modules of our training deal specifically with body and then the complex trauma that's associated with those kinds of injuries or PTSD actually. So in a simple answer, let's go back to person in the mind, of which I've had several of those, not myself, but clients. Somebody's in the mine, they're working, there's rumbling, people run, all of a sudden everything goes dark and they're laying there trapped. I can't move. So they're saying, I can't move. I can't move. Just put yourself in that position for a second. Doesn't feel very good, right? There's going to be panic, there's going to be blah, blah. And if it doesn't kill you right away and you're laying there, which is, I've seen this with clients, the imprint only gets deeper and more solidified, right? So the position that the body's in, and this is why we use psychodrama in our work. So when somebody gets collapsed by a mine, I'm on top of them with a pillow and having them show me, how are you laying there? It's not, this kind of regression. That's a different kind of regression, right? So they're twisted and they're pushing, and all of these are the imprints that get stuck in the etheric body. So the inability to push the thing off gets stuck in the etheric body, right? As well as the emotions and the thoughts, right? Many times in those situations, I'm thinking of one in particular, client that I worked with that was in that kind of situation and was crying out to the brothers that had been in the mine with him and could barely hear them above the surface, but they couldn't get to him. So there was all of this kind of grieving, at first anger at the brothers, come get me, you abandoned me, all of those thoughts and feelings, panic, frustration, blah, blah. All of those things need to be reworked. But the first thing that needs to happen is you need to get the rocks off, because you won't release that part of the soul that's stuck there. Because in shamanic terms, that part of the soul is still stuck in that mind. It's still there. Just like my soldier, whose part of his soul is still stuck by the roadside, like this, with all of the thoughts and feelings of, I've got to save him, I can't save him, right? Right? It's all stuck there. So you have to unfreeze it. Think of it like a frozen moment. And so the first thing that needs to happen is get the things off. All of a sudden, right? And there's lots of ways we do this in our work. We have animal helpers come and help dig them and pull them out and get them to, but the physical, again, this is why the etheric body is still, and lots of times people like that, they might have scoliosis, they might have, there's some transmitted physical thing that represents that kind of, and this was, Ian Stevenson's work showed this. Many times fatal wounds in past lives will carry over as birthmarks, or, you were hung and you have neck problems, those kinds of things. Fatal physical last moments will freeze in the etheric body and be transmitted life to life in like form, right? So, the first thing you need to do is get that off. And then, and then all of the emotions out, right? Maybe re-meet the brothers and be angry at them and then be happy to see them. And then, let it all out, right? And then all of the thoughts of like that thought of saying, I'll never get out of here, right? Leaves a mental kind of imprint of stuckness, right? I remember working with a guy who was saying something about feeling stuck and that he can't find joy in his life. And we went to this life. This is such a simple life, but it was so profound for him. He was a wine farmer somewhere out in Italy or something. And, the whole life was just like, la, 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 everything's great. And the sun is out and I'm doing my wine, and I'm like, where's the trauma, man? And, he's got the family and the kids and the dog and everything's great. And he's loved in the village and blah, blah, blah. And he's out in the field. And one day he's out in the field and he's got the barrels on his wagon, and one of them, it breaks loose and rolls off and crushes him. But he lays in the field like with this thing on him, going over his life and how unfair it was and how angry at God he was that this was going to be taken away from him, and the desperation of having somebody come and find him, but they didn't, and so on and so forth, right? And then this was the imprint that led him to feeling stuck and unable to have joy in his life. But the first thing I had to do with him was get the barrel off after he died, because that part of his psyche was still stuck there. I'm crushed. I can't move. Because when you're saying it to yourself, it's a hypnotic trance. I can't move. I can't move. It's just like now I can attest to having many lifetimes of dying in very dark dungeons somewhere. Right? I've had many of those, right? Dying in prison. And in those lives, there's this, I'll never get out, right? Which can lead to a carry forward of a kind of complex of, what I called self-created prisons in this lifetime, right? Self-limiting prisons. Well, I can't do that because blah, blah, blah. And these were all just boxes that came from a kind of hangover from all of these different lives of, being stuck. So I had to go and get all those people out of those prisons, right? Does that answer your question? Okay. So if we do we have more questions or anything, or are we wrapping up, or I don't know what time we're ending? Because I can just keep going on.
We'll go another 15 minutes if there are questions.
Okay.
Looks like-
Donna? I'm sorry, you have to unmute yourself.
Well, I am.
There you are.
I think this might be a question for the group, but based on what you were just saying about what you have experienced at the death scene and also what your clients have, I always have my clients be able to go through the death without the pain, so that they're separate from it. I've never even thought of what you just described, because it's never happened in more than 20 years for me.
Mm.
But I was taught by Henry Leo Bolduc the way to have them not be physically experiencing the trauma, so that they move beyond it in a gentle way. I mean, you have them look at that soul if it was a challenging death, but I'm just wondering if other people have clients that are having a trauma from that. or not.
I don't, again, I don't know if your question was clear to the group of, does it matter if you, see, we're very into, I mean, our methodology is specifically about this, healing this complex kind of trauma, PTSD.
But yeah,
And
but what I'm
all,
saying is my clients don't go, so maybe it's
yeah,
the
right.
state
No,
of the client when they come
yeah,
in.
yeah, I hear
Yeah,
what
that's
you're
probably
saying.
it.
I hear what
Yeah.
you're saying, and so I'm thinking that I'm just rephrasing your question to the group. Maybe what you're asking is, do you find that if you don't enact the death scene or reenact the trauma, do you find that that's effective or not effective? Is
No,
that
that's
what
not my
you're, I'm
question.
sorry,
No,
I'm
that's not
sorry
my
then.
question at all. It would be
Okay,
the opposite of that. That by not doing that, not taking them and having them deal in a very focused way on the trauma, of being able to move beyond it.
mm-hmm.
Maybe I just need to give it more thought.
Okay.
Oh, and so maybe this would be a question. How many of you on this are psychologists or psychiatrists? Like, raise hands. So the most of us aren't. And yet I've been a crisis manager all my life. So I do get the clients that nobody else wants. And I get the unusual cases.
I do too.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
It's my
remember you saying
specialty.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Kaya?
Okay, simple question here. I wondered, I'm imagining the death scene and the physicality of it. And you haven't talked about their dying, the dying part of the experience. Is that because that's, for as far as I know, that's so often a part of the past life work?
Oh, it's critical in the work. The
Yeah,
death.
so if
Oh yeah, it's
somebody,
critical. Yes.
all right, so the person who was in a cave or whatever that was, I
Mm-hmm.
can't quite remember. So finally that pressure, the physicality part, is relieved and the body is no longer stuck. Then what? Does that person die, or?
Oh no, they're dead already. We're doing this in the spirit world, right? So we went fully through the death, the loss of air, the whatever, all of that happened, and then the spirit dies, the soul dies, the body dies, and the soul is looking down at the body crushed there. But what we find in our work, like that kind of example, is that if you follow that part of the soul, and without even being directive, you'll just say to them, so what happens next? And they're still there. They're not going anywhere. They're still there. And the reality is that part of the soul's been stuck there for a couple hundred years. Until they came to do that session. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can, souls can wander. This is where we get earthbound spirits from. I mean, earthbound spirits are parts of other people's soul fragments still hanging in village squares or, whatever they're doing, right? It's like pollution. It's like astral pollution, all of these fragmented parts of souls. But at least we see in our work, right, that part of the psyche, and it's not the total soul, but it's a fragment part that's split off, is still stuck there. And so if you say to them, so what happens next? They're just there. Sometimes it takes a lot of work to get them out of there, because we know that or I would say we assume, because again, thousands of cases kind of show, tens of thousands of cases kind of show that we know that the help comes after life, but we also know that we can be so in our our grief, our despair, our darkness, our stuckness, our whatever, that we don't see it. That part of the soul does not see it. I mean, the Tibetan Book of the Dead backs this up. This is what all part of their Bardo work is about, where they're actually, reading the Book of the Dead, the Bardo Tadol, to the dying person, basically saying, leave your family behind. Do not think about your crops. Don't turn away and look to the light. Find the supernal light. They're trying to train them to not do what we all do at death, right? Oftentimes, parts of our soul are still angry at the perpetrator, or stuck in the cave, or hanging in the prison, or, longing for the lover that left us, or grieving something. And that part of the soul is still in that bubble. I call it a Bardo bubble, right? And our job as therapists, at least in what I teach, is to pop that Bardo bubble. And there's lots of different methods. Again, physical psychodrama being one of them, but there's many different techniques and ways to pop that bubble. And that's a progressive thing that happens in what we call our Bardo work. So in deep memory process, at least in the way that we work, I would say 50% of the session is running the story and getting the imprints and doing all of that. And the other 50% is all doing healing in the afterlife.
Oh.
And that's dissolving, breaking through the defenses, the Bardo bubble, popping the Bardo bubble. And that work happens on all three levels. We make sure that we address the physical, the emotional, and the mental.
Thank you. That's a very interesting. The levels,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions, thoughts, experiences?
Joanne has her hand up physically.
Yes, Joanne?
Can you tell us about the training, a little more about your training program?
Oh, it's deep memory process, 4 modules, taught over 2 years. First module is running the story. Second module is working in the Bardo. Third module is working with the body and regression therapy. And the fourth module is dealing with current life regression and complex trauma. So again, the things that I'm saying are carefully taught over 2 years, right? And they're advanced techniques. So it isn't the kind of thing that, I guess, how do I say this? I think in my observation, what I've seen is that a client's psyche will respond to the level of the container that it's in and to the skills of the therapist that it's in. So somebody may go to you, and experience maybe even the same life, but trust me, I've done it. People have come to me where they've done the same life with other people, yet there's still residue. But their psyche is coming to me because I have the ability or the propensity to release a certain level of residue that wasn't happening in another, right? So, and as we know, your current life is complex. Our past lives are just as complex, right? And so what I say is that, don't open it up if you don't know what to do with it, right? and that's fine, right? And most likely the client's psyche will not open up that level if that's not your way of working and your style and your comfort level and your skill. I mean, or your propensity or your even desire to work with that kind of content.
Mhm,
We all have our specialties, and people are drawn to us
mhm,
for what it is we offer, right?
mhm,
I mean, I'm sure we've all seen that, right?
mhm.
People come to us for a reason. Did that answer your question,
Yes,
Joanne?
thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I would also add, I actually think, and maybe because I'm always thinking on the spiritual level, I actually think people are guided to us very specifically because at a higher level, their highest self and their spirit guides know the person who can handle them at that moment in time, where they are, what they need, etc. So for
Yes.
me, I just, I think the scheduling officer's in charge.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I mean, I've seen it, I've seen it in practice for sure.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope that I've given you some insight into my perspectives on why regression therapy works.
Thank you
Um,
so much for being here for us and sharing all this. It's really, really important information, Patricia.
mm,
Thank you.
Yeah,
So
thank you for the good work you're doing.
thank you, all of us, right? We're all healing the world psyche one soul at a time, right?
do that. Okay.
It's true. I mean, the more we can alleviate our clients from these repeating patterns, which then become collective archetypes, right? You're freeing a soul from a limitation, an archetypal limitation that exists, but you're also softening the archetype itself. So let's just say this archetype that we have of victim perpetrator, right? The more we alleviate one soul at a time, we soften that kind of groove that people that our collective gets stuck in. So I think that everyone that we work with also serves the overall collective as well.
And the opposite of that is when that happens, we're expanding the consciousness. We're expanding our potential for our evolution.
That's it. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that gets to the point of when that libido, because when I say libidinal energy, I think of it as pure soul, right? And our souls are limited a lot by our wounds because of those defenses and natural functions of the psyche that form to protect us. And then that limits the soul's potentiality. Although the soul has that potentiality, it's limited. And what is soul potential? What is evolution but the expression of soul potentiality? So when we can remove those blocks and defenses and soften that and release that soul potentiality, we are assisting evolution. I mean, in my book, Karmic Complexes, it was all about that, right? And each case shows this kind of, moving from this condensed, complex into pure potentiality.
Darkness to light.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Patricia.
Okay. Thank you
See
very
everybody
much.
next month.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks,
See
Holly.
you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.